A Song for Silas by Lori Wick. Chapter 19. Silas, do you miss your mom? Very much. Amy's mind was 4 years back in time. Silas had been scheduled to leave for home in 2 days. They were talking up on the bluff behind her house, seated beneath the big oaks. The spot was Amy's favorite thinking place. Do you think about her all the time? Not so much now, but right after she died, I thought about her constantly. Amy was silent for a long time. When she turned to Silas, there were tears in her eyes, the first he'd seen. It's not fair, she whispered. It's not fair that she's gone and now you're leaving too. Oh, sweetheart, was all he could say as he folded her within his arms. Amy sobbed then. The arms holding her close and the loving endearment were too much. The tears came in a torrent. Silas continued to hold her and speak quietly to her, stroking her hair and calling her sweetheart. He told her God understood her pain and that he was there for her. Amy could not remember anything after that. The next day, Silas told her she had cried herself to sleep in his arms. Silas had carried her all the way back to the house and delivered her into the arms of her anxious father, who had been watching them from the house. What Amy did not know, since her father put her to bed and she slept through the night, was that Silas had retired to his room to let his own tears fall. Tears for the 13-year-old boy he had been while watching his mother's body being lowered into the ground. Tears for the 14-year-old girl who had had no siblings with which to share her grief. This young girl who was lonely and scared, who was having to say goodbye to him now that their friendship had become so special. Amy came out of her reverie when she heard the team and wagon in the yard. For a moment she stood at the kitchen window and wondered what had brought on her memory. She loved it when Silas called her sweetheart. He was the only person who did, and it gave her a special feeling inside. Maybe that was what she wanted, that special feeling. Silas had been so distant for the last few days. Amy told herself he must be homesick, but even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. As Amy watched out the window, she thought she saw some white paper in Silas's shirt pocket. She hoped he had gotten a letter from home. That was sure to cheer him up. Silas spotted Amy at the window, but he kept his face turned away. He had received letters from home, but he hadn't even looked at them. He had also seen Bev Randall in town, and she had given Silas a verbal message for Amy. It was not a happy message, and along with trying to keep his feelings for her hidden, he had the starting of a headache. It looked to be a long evening. Silas was sure he should wait until tomorrow to deliver his message to Amy, but when Amy said her dad wanted a tray in his room, Silas knew the time was now. He knew he was acting oddly from the way, or rather, he knew he was acting oddly from the looks Amy kept sending him. She had been eyeing him curiously for the last few days. He was not succeeding in his act, wanting her to believe nothing between them had changed. The signs of love, watchfulness, the need to be close, wanting to touch, were new to Silas, and because he had to hide them, painful. Silas had worked at not reaching for her hand or touching her hair more than once in the last few days. The time when Amy had casually touched his arm as she spoke had been torture. Silas wanted to take her small hand in his own and hold it for hours. Last night, Amy had teased him and flicked water in his direction while they were doing the dishes. When she had turned to him, her face wreathed in smiles and laughter, Silas had gripped the dishcloth tightly to keep from grabbing and kissing her. "Silas, did you hear from home?" The silence between them continued to lengthen as they ate, and Amy could no longer stand it. "Now, Silas," he said to himself as he faced Amy across the table, "I did get letters from home, but I haven't read them yet." Amy's brow rose in questioning surprise, but she stayed silent. "I saw your aunt while in town. She sent you a message." Silas's somber tone frightened Amy. There will be no summer wedding for Thomas Blaine and Deborah Wheeler because they were married quietly on Monday. She said to tell you that it's not town gossip. She spoke directly to Thomas. Silas paused, and his voice dropped low. "Thomas told your aunt that Deborah is pregnant. The baby is due in the fall. Mr. Wheeler insisted they move the wedding up, and Mrs. Wheeler insisted they live with them until the baby is born." Your aunt said she wanted to tell you herself, but felt a message from me was better than waiting and having you possibly hear the news through the gossip lines." Silas watched as dismay and sadness showed in Amy's eyes. Silas knew that any emotional pain he had previously felt was minimal compared to the pain he felt in knowing the woman he was in love with. Silas knew that any emotional pain he had previously felt was minimal compared to the pain he felt in knowing the woman he loved was in love with another man. "I'm sorry, Amy." Silas's voice was husky with raw emotion. Amy looked at the big, gentle man across from her and knew she had to clarify things for him. He was hurting for her, and she knew that in a few words she could lessen the pain. "Si, I'm not in love with Thomas. In fact, I've begun to wonder if I ever was. I'm sorry for both Thomas and Deborah. In fact, a part of me can understand how easily it could happen. But as painful as Thomas's rejection was, I'm glad we're not married. It obviously would have been a mistake." Silas felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders, but his feeling of euphoria didn't last. "You see, Si, I feel that my dad needs me here. This is my home. My decision not to marry has nothing to do with Thomas breaking off with me. I feel this is God's way of showing me this is where I belong, here, taking care of Father. And even if I had doubts about my feelings, Dad's accident confirmed them. He needs me here." "Amy, does your dad know you feel this way? Somehow I think he would want you to have a home of your own." Silas made no attempt to hide the distress her words caused him. But Amy didn't take his words personally. "Oh, Silas, I know you mean well, but this is my home. You're going to think it's silly, but whenever I'm away, even for a trip into town, as soon as I spot our farm, my heart begins to sing. I know this is where I belong." "Well, Amy, your aunt will be glad you were not overly upset." The statement sounded inane even to his own ears, but he couldn't possibly tell her what he was really thinking. Amy noticed Silas's surprise upon hearing her beliefs, but she knew she was right. In fact, so sure was she that her mind had already moved back to Thomas and Deborah. She didn't even notice when Silas refused dessert and quickly excused himself to check on the cows.